Luxury is in serious trouble, not just in America. In January of 2026, the richest man in Europe got on his own earnings call and admitted out loud that some of the brands he owns had raised prices in a somewhat extravagant manner, without really giving any justification. The man who owns Louis Vuitton, Dior, and 45 other luxury houses, confessing on a call to Wall Street that his own portfolio had been overcharging you. He's just the one who said the quiet part out loud. The brands you were told for 30 years were untouchable are panicking behind their polished storefronts. They jacked up prices, they cut quality, they moved production to factories you've never seen. Consumers are waking up, wallets are closing, and the empire is facing a reckoning it earned. Today, we're counting down 15 luxury brands in deep trouble. For each one, I'll tell you what still earns the price tag and what doesn't. If you've bought a forever bag in the last 5 years, there's a real chance you paid forever money for something built like fast fashion. Trust me. Some of these names will shock you. 15. Hugo Boss. Hugo Boss promised investors 5 billion euros in annual revenue by 2025. The plan has been abandoned. In March, the company cut its dividend 97%, the legal minimum a German corporation is allowed to pay, and announced a sales decline for 2026. A Third Bridge analyst described the situation in 3 words: no man's land. For 40 years, Hugo Boss meant the sharp-shouldered suit, the clean lapel, the jacket that said you'd been taken seriously in a room before you opened your mouth. Then, somebody in a boardroom decided the suit buyer was too old and pivoted the brand to hoodies and sneakers. Real adults made that decision in a real meeting. The loyal older customers who valued the tailoring walked away. The younger audience never embraced the brand, alienated the customer they had, failed to find the customer they wanted. Simultaneously, for 5 years, the suit buyer went to a tailor. The 25-year-old walked past the window without looking up from his phone. In the second quarter of 2024, operating profit fell 42%, the worst quarter since the current CEO took the job. Credit where due, a Hugo Boss two-piece still cuts cleaner than most jackets at the same price. The problem isn't the product. The problem is Hugo Boss is too embarrassed of the only customer who ever paid its bills. The suit guy bought the suits for 40 years. Then the brand told him he wasn't who they were selling to anymore and charged him more for the privilege. If you still want the suit, buy it on sale. Don't fund the hoodie experiment at full price. Hugo Boss put the suit on the rack, built a hoodie line next to it, and told the suit guy it wasn't for him. He took the hint. Which brings us to a brand written down almost $1 billion 8 years after it was bought. 14. Kate Spade. Kate Spade was the bag on the desk of the first job, the black and white striped shopping bag at a birthday or a graduation. In 2017, Tapestry, the conglomerate that owns Coach, paid $2.4 billion for the brand. 8 years later, in August of 2025, they wrote down $855 million on it. Public explanation? We just haven't executed well. The corporate equivalent of a husband who forgot the anniversary saying, "Yeah, that's on me." 8 years. Almost $1 billion lost. In consulting terms, value creation. In regular terms, setting fire to money. Neil Saunders at Global Data was less gentle. The assortment is somewhat confused, he said. Some nice individual pieces, but the whole thing lacks a coherent narrative, which is what a paid analyst sounds like. Trying to tell the New York Times the executives running Kate Spade don't know what a Kate Spade is. Sales fell 10% for the full fiscal year, 13% in the fourth quarter, still falling. Reviewers describe the hardware flaking within months, zippers failing within 6, lining separating from the body. Looks like Kate Spade from across the room. Up close, it isn't. The Kate Spade stationery line, the planners, the notebooks, is still genuinely charming and built to last. Love the handbags? Look for pieces made before 2017. That's the pre-Tapestry line. At full retail today, you're funding the write-down, not the craftsmanship. Meanwhile, Tapestry is still publicly calling Kate Spade an excellent strategic fit and a value creation opportunity. Real quote, same month they wrote off $855 million on the same brand. Accountants got a memo saying it's worth less. Shareholders got a memo saying it's excellent. Both are correct, depending on which memo you were allowed to read. Kate Spade wasn't killed by the market. It was bought by people who never understood why anyone loved it. Which brings us to a brand sold twice in 7 years at a $750 million loss. 13. Versace. Gianni Versace built a brand on dangerous glamour. Safety pin dresses on Elizabeth Hurley. Gold Medusa hardware so heavy you felt the weight the second you picked up the bag. In 2018, Capri Holdings, the American conglomerate that also owns Michael Kors, paid approximately $2.12 billion for the company. In 2025, Capri sold Versace to Prada Group for $1.375 billion. $750 million of value destroyed in 7 years by a company headquartered in Midtown Manhattan. What did Capri do to earn those numbers? They made Versace, in their own words, more sophisticated. Corporate for, "We paid $2 billion for the loudest brand in luxury and spent 7 years trying to make it whisper." Revenue fell 21% in the fourth quarter of fiscal 2025. The Americas fell 15%. The people buying Versace were buying it because it wasn't sophisticated. That was the whole point. And then they came for Donatella. In 2024, Capri moved Donatella Versace, creative director for 27 years. A former Versace Atelier employee told Italian trade press the brief from New York was to tone it down, make it wearable. The translation was simpler: make it not Versace. A consumer on Purse Forum described a post-Capri chain bag. Looks like Versace, doesn't feel like Versace, the chain is thinner and rattles when you walk. You're still paying a Versace price. You're just not holding a Versace. The Versace home line, the Barocco plates, the ceramics, is still made in Italy at the original standard. The clothing and handbags are a different story. If you want real Versace, wait. Let Prada's first collections land before you spend thousands on a bag that rattles. Which brings us to the other Capri brand being quietly prepared for the exit door. 12. Jimmy Choo. Picture the shoe. 4-inch satin heel, Swarovski crystals along the toe, the exact red that looks wet under a flashbulb. You saved for this pair. You wore it to the wedding, then kept it in the box for 10 years because you couldn't bring yourself to wear it anywhere less. That was a Jimmy Choo. In 2017, Capri Holdings paid $1.2 billion for the brand. 8 years later, Jimmy Choo revenue fell 2.9% in a single quarter, while Capri posted a $645 million net loss. The Oscar shoe is now a line item on a bad quarterly report. Asia revenue collapsed 17%. The Americas technically went up 6%, less a growth signal than a passenger on the Titanic getting an upgrade to first class. Sources told WWD last month that Jimmy Choo could be spun off or sold, possibly back to co-founder Tamara Mellon. The kind of story that only shows up when the owners are already making phone calls. The old Jimmy Choo had a specific weight on a marble floor. It changed your posture the moment it was on your foot. Reviewers of post-Capri pairs described shallower arch support and insoles separating inside 6 hours of wear. $800. Still a shoe, still one that starts coming off your heel between the main course and the cake. Capri CEO John Idle said publicly that Jimmy Choo needed to return to its original identity. The chief executive of the company that owns Jimmy Choo, blaming the brand for drifting under his own 7-year watch. A man who's been dieting for a decade, stepping on the scale and telling the scale somebody needs to eat less. The Jimmy Choo illicit fragrance is still a legitimately well-made scent. The shoe business is where the damage lives. If you need a one-night shoe, buy it in person, inspect the insole, and know you're paying red carpet money for reception-only quality. For anything more, go elsewhere. Capri is preparing a sale and hoping somebody pays more than the wreckage is worth. Which brings us to a brand whose own parent company chief executive confessed on his own earnings call that the whole portfolio had been overcharging without justification. 11. Dior. In 1994, Christian Dior made a bag for Princess Diana. He named it after her, the Lady Dior. That bag, the one Diana carried through the last years of the most photographed life of the 20th century, now costs $5,500 for the basic version. And Bernard Arnault, the chief executive of the company that owns Dior, said on his own earnings call in January that some of his brands had increased their prices in a somewhat extravagant manner, without really giving any justification. His words about his own portfolio: Dior is in that portfolio, the richest man in Europe telling Wall Street, politely that the brands he owns had been overcharging customers for no particular reason. Most industries, a sentence like that ends a career. In luxury, it ended the call and everyone went to lunch. Because in luxury, overcharging customers isn't the scandal, it's the business model. YouGov tracks brand consideration, the percentage of shoppers who would consider buying. Dior's score dropped from 12.9 to 11.1% in 4 months. People aren't just not buying, they've stopped considering. And the real punchline is how Dior tried to grow: over-distribution. The same brand charging $5,500 for the Lady Dior sells its skincare through the same beauty halls that carry Neutrogena. The Dior serum sits 18 inches from the oil of Olay. Exclusivity requires scarcity. Dior sold the scarcity at the Macy's makeup counter. The Lady Dior itself, the quilted connage, the gold charm spelling D-I-O-R. Reviewers who own both vintage and current versions describe the vintage cannage as deeper, each diamond recess distinctly pressed. Current production, shallower, at $5,500 a bag. Diana's version was better made than the one named after her costs now. Sauvage and Miss Dior are legitimately excellent fragrances, made to a different standard than the handbags. If your Dior budget stretches to one thing, make it fragrance, not a bag built lighter than Diana's. Which brings us to a brand whose stock is down 70% in 5 years and whose own retail analyst told the press the love affair is over. 10. Canada Goose. What happens when the world's most famous cold weather coat becomes a status symbol for people who will never need to survive cold weather? You get Canada Goose. Stock down approximately 70% over 5 years. Direct-to-consumer sales down 13% in a single quarter. A net loss of $15.2 million in the second quarter of fiscal 2026. Retail analyst Randy Harris, talking to Retail Insider, put it in a sentence: "The love affair with Canada Goose is over." The love affair was always strange. You were paying $1,500 for a coat engineered for Arctic research stations, then wearing it on a subway platform between 2 heated buildings, where the coat is so densely insulated it turns a 10-minute commute into a survival situation. The Expedition Parka is rated for -40 degrees. The subway platform at Bloor Young at 5 p.m. is not. And then came the robberies. Toronto Star and CBC News documented it. Mugging specifically targeting jacket wearers. Read that carefully. You paid $1,500 for the visibility. The visibility put a target on your back, and the company kept making the logo bigger. The company promised investors 5 billion Canadian dollars in revenue by 2028. Target quietly abandoned. The way a diet is quietly abandoned in the second week of January. Wholesale revenue fell 28.5% in 1 quarter. They cut Sporting Life, one of the largest retailers in their home market, gone. For an actual Arctic researcher, Canada Goose still makes the product you need. The company confused being best at keeping somebody alive at -40 with being a luxury status brand. If you're walking from the car to the mall, you're paying survival money for a commute. A logo patch that turned into a target is not a luxury. It's a mistake the customer can see in the mirror. Which brings us to a brand that sells at every outlet mall in America at 60% off and still tried to charge $800 at full price. 45% through this countdown, the stories stop being about strategic miscalculation and start being about executives who knew exactly what they were doing to the customer and did it anyway. Hit subscribe. The 10 brands left include the biggest names in luxury and the worst of what they did. 9. Michael Kors. You can buy Michael Kors at Ross, at TJ Maxx, at every outlet mall in America at 60% off the bag that was full price 3 months ago. And Capri Holdings, the same parent that owns Versace and Jimmy Choo, tried to charge $800 for a full-price Michael Kors bag and call it luxury. Revenue fell 14.2% in a single quarter. The audience had already left. The indictment here isn't opinion. It's a federal court ruling. In October of 2024, the Federal Trade Commission blocked the Tapestry-Capri merger. And in the court record, Tapestry's own internal documents describe the upside of the deal as an opportunity to reduce Michael Kors discounting. Translation: Tapestry's executives told a federal judge in writing that Michael Kors is a brand defined by discounts and they wanted to buy Capri so they could raise prices. Capri shares fell 46% in a single session, the biggest one-day drop in the stock's history. The government effectively protected Michael Kors customers from a price hike their own owners were planning. Per the court ruling, Michael Kors goods are made primarily in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Indonesia. Same factory tier as a lot of mall brands, charging $800 at full price and hoping you don't look at the country of origin tag. The Michael Kors logo tote, gold hardware, coated canvas that reviewers describe peeling at the corners within 12 to 18 months, hardware tarnishing, leaving green marks on clothing. One reviewer opened a new jet set and described the zipper pull as hollow and lightweight, painted plastic, not metal. $800, made in Vietnam, peeling in 18 months. Michael Kors, at its actual market price, $300 at the outlet, is genuinely a legitimate value. At $800 full price, you're a donor, not a customer. Michael Kors built an empire convincing middle-class consumers they could afford aspirational style, then put that style at every outlet in America, then acted surprised when full-price customers concluded they'd been played, which brings us to a brand down 53% in revenue over 3 years that fired the chief executive they hired to fix it. 8. Salvatore Ferragamo. Salvatore Ferragamo made the shoes Audrey Hepburn wore. The shoes that defined what Italian craftsmanship meant to 2 generations of women. Then the boardroom sold your grandmother's reputation and cashed it in on your shoes. They killed the Varapump. They killed the classics. The iconic styles that built 70 years of credibility got discontinued in favor of trend-forward designs nobody asked for. They bet the house on chasing trends and lost more than half the business in 3 years. There isn't a single market on the map where that gamble paid off. In 2024, the company posted a net loss of 68 million euros. Shares fell more than half their value. Chief executive Marco Gobbetti, poached from Burberry specifically for this turnaround, departed in March of 2025 after failing to stop a single year of decline. A turnaround specialist, fired for not turning it around. The specialty wasn't the problem. A longtime customer told a fashion forum, "I've been buying Ferragamo for over 15 years, and the shoes now feel cheap." A collector described her grandmother's Ferragamos from the 1980s with the insole leather still intact, and her own pair from 2019 peeling after 18 months. Same logo, different company and everything but the label. If the insole is glued foam instead of stitched leather, that's the pair to leave on the shelf. Yes, the silk ties and scarves still feel like old Ferragamo. Nobody built a billion-euro company on neckties alone, and the shoes that did build it are the ones falling apart. Ferragamo traded 70 years of craftsmanship credibility for a trend cycle. The trend never arrived, and the credibility was already gone. Which brings us to a brand privately owned by one of the richest families in Europe, who used the absence of shareholders to raise the price of their classic bag 86% in 5 years. 7. Chanel. Chanel is privately owned by the Wertheimer family. No shareholders, no earnings calls, no board. That is the entire governance structure, and they used it to raise the price of the classic medium flap 86% in 5 years, while American inflation ran 23%, until the bag that cost $5,800 in 2019 reached $11,300 in 2025. 86 versus 23, nearly 4 times inflation, same bag for 5 straight years. No new materials, no new craftsmanship. Bruno Pavlovsky, president of fashion at Chanel, gave the official justification to WWD: 278 steps to make each bag, craftspeople needing years of training. Lovely story. Also the same exact bag it was in 2019 when it cost half as much. Either the craftsmanship doubled or the price didn't have much to do with the craftsmanship. Pavlovsky himself conceded it in the same interview. Price increases can become an issue when the quality doesn't match the cost. Then he insisted the quality justified the increase. A Purse-Forum reviewer documented a pink classic flap with hardware that rusted before the bag was ever used. Another found fraying thread after 7 uses. An independent leather crafter noted a cheap-looking plastic zipper pull on a bag costing thousands. Rust, fraying, plastic on an $11,000 handbag. Chanel fragrance and beauty remains best in class. Number 5 is a legitimate icon, and the perfumery craftsmanship didn't slip while the handbag craftsmanship did. Want Chanel without the resentment? Buy fragrance. The handbags now are a luxury-priced gamble your grandmother didn't have to take. YouGov's brand consideration scores for Chanel are declining. The Wertheimer family answers to nobody. And that turns out to be a problem when the customers have started answering for themselves. Which brings us to a brand that charged $1,000 for sneakers, designed to look destroyed, then released an ad campaign the internet is still not finished with. 6. Balenciaga. Balenciaga sold intentionally distressed sneakers for $1,000. Intentionally destroyed hoodies for $2,000. The brand philosophy, if you had to ask why, you didn't get it. Then in 2022, Balenciaga released an ad campaign featuring child models holding teddy bears, dressed in bondage gear. A separate campaign placed a Balenciaga bag on a page from a United States Supreme Court ruling related to child pornography. Suddenly, everyone had a very loud question. Balenciaga filed a $25 million lawsuit against the production company, claiming the content appeared without Balenciaga's knowledge. The set designer's agent, Gabriela Musieff, told the Washington Post the opposite. Everyone from Balenciaga was on the shoot, on every shot. They worked on the edit of every image in post-production. Balenciaga dropped the lawsuit. Musieff's statement stayed. That's not a retraction, that's a timeline. Balenciaga's operating profit fell from approximately 299 million euros in 2022 to approximately 45 million in 2023, an 85% collapse in a single year. Creative director Demna Gvasalia left for Gucci in July 2025. As of this month, Balenciaga still has no named creative director. The Balenciaga Triple S, the deliberately ugly sole. Reviewers describe the shoe as physically heavy, like wearing a small building on each foot. You paid $1,000 and it arrived already feeling like something discarded. The destroyed hoodies had frayed edges straight from the factory. You paid for the damage. Demna kept his job. 2 flagship stores were vandalized. Operating profit fell 85%. That is the market's answer. Which brings us to a brand 168 years old that disclosed in its own annual report it had burned tens of millions of dollars in clothing to maintain exclusivity. 5. Burberry. Burberry is 168 years old. It survived the First World War, the Second World War, the Great Depression, and 2008. It did not survive its own decision. 28.6 million British pounds of unsold merchandise destroyed in a single year, disclosed in the company's own annual report, rather than let the clothes reach anyone who might be wearing their last coat. Over 5 years, Burberry destroyed more than 90 million pounds of goods. The strategy? Maintain exclusivity by making sure the clothes do not exist. A public company filing telling investors they burned clothing as a business practice. Burberry published it on the corporate website. Nobody leaked this. They told you. Kantar Brand Zed 2024. Burberry lost nearly $2 billion in brand value, a 42% drop. Burberry lost a massive share of its market value and was ejected from the FTSE 100 for the first time in 15 years after 3 profit warnings in a row. Chief Executive Jonathan Akeroyd was fired in July 2024. The Burberry trench coat, the gabardine Thomas Burberry invented, the cotton twill that came back from the First World War with a reputation for surviving everything. Vintage buyers describe a substantial weight, a faint waxy smell from the treatment. Current trench coats, reviewers say, are lighter, less dense, synthetic lined. One purse forum reviewer put it plainly, looks the same on the hanger, but the weight just isn't there. The coat that survived 2 world wars got lighter when the brand decided to chase fashion. The Burberry cashmere check scarf is still made to a real cashmere standard and remains one of the few things from the brand still worth what it costs. New chief executive Joshua Schulman got Burberry back into the FTSE 100 in 2025. He's sworn off the bonfire strategy, but you're still paying for years of destroyed inventory baked into today's prices. 90 million pounds burned to protect a price point, 2 billion in brand value gone. Which brings us to a news story that broke 3 days ago. 4. Dolce & Gabbana. In 2018, Dolce & Gabbana released a Chinese ad campaign showing a Chinese model struggling to eat Italian food with oversized chopsticks. Chinese consumers and Chinese media called it racist. The ad pulled. The Shanghai fashion show canceled. Celebrities dropped the brand. Then, Stefano Gabbana, co-founder, face of the brand, got caught sending private messages on Instagram calling China, direct quote, the country of shit. The defense: he'd been hacked. A hacker with access to his personal account used it not to steal anything and not to leak anything, but to type out thoughts about Chinese food that just happened to match his public voice exactly. Chinese consumers did not believe him. Chinese sales collapsed. The brand has never recovered in the most important growth market in luxury. Stefano Gabbana, the man who said the hacker did it, is the same man who just quietly walked away from the company he co-founded 41 years ago. 3 days ago, on April 10, 2026, it was confirmed that Gabbana had resigned as chairman, effective January 1st. The filing sat in Milan all winter. The press caught up in April. Company statement: a natural evolution of its organizational structure. What the statement didn't mention: the brand is juggling about 450 million euros of debt. The banks want fresh capital before they proceed. Gabbana is reportedly considering selling his 40% stake. The operating reality: a loss of 82.4 million euros in fiscal 2025. American market sales down 13%. Revenue up to 1.9 billion euros. Spending faster than earning. New flagship in Riyadh. Beauty expansion. While the most important Western market fell 13, the Dolce fragrance business remains a bright spot. Light blue is a legitimately excellent perfume, and the design DNA is strong enough that a disciplined new owner could rebuild. A co-founder of 41 years, walking out through a January corporate filing while Rothschild negotiates 450 million euros of debt. The company calls it natural evolution. A house on fire, describing the smoke as ambiance. If a new owner comes in to plug that hole, they'll raise prices. Don't volunteer to be the test customer. Which brings us to a brand that fired the designer who made it beloved and replaced him with the one who just failed at Gucci. 3. Valentino. Imagine spending a decade building something, a shade of red so saturated it became a Pantone classification of its own. A brand so emotionally resonant made women cry at the runway. And then getting fired and watching the company hand your desk to the guy who had just failed at the exact same job at your biggest competitor. That is Pier Paolo Piccioli's 2024. For nearly 10 years, Piccioli made Valentino the brand women wore to the most important nights of their lives. The Valentino Red, the Barbie-core pink wave of 2022. His final collection was entirely black. One Milan source described it in 4 words: the color of goodbyes. In March 2024, Valentino fired him. The replacement: Alessandro Michele, the designer who had just spent 2 years failing to turn Gucci around before Kering let him go. One brand firing the person who made it matter, and hiring the person who just failed at the same job down the street, then being surprised when the new collection didn't sell. Operating profit fell 22% to 246 million euros in 2024. Second year in a row of decline. Sources told Reuters that Valentino's usual customers are not buying the new collection. The old customer walked out. The new one never walked in. Kering bought a 30% stake in Valentino in 2023 for $1.7 billion, with a binding option to buy the whole company by 2028. Kering also owns Gucci, down 23%, and Balenciaga, operating profit down 85%. The same conglomerate managing Gucci's crisis now holds 30% of Valentino, roughly the feeling of your neighbor whose house is on fire, showing up with a binding option to purchase yours. The Valentino Garavani rock stud heel, the one with the pyramid studs along the strap, is still one of the best-made designer shoes money can buy. The ready-to-wear looks like Valentino on the hanger and sells like a clearance rack once it hits the floor. Kering owns 30% already with the right to take the rest, and Valentino is being prepared as the next Gucci. A brand burned down to make Kering's balance sheet work. Stop and notice what just happened. Gucci down 23%, Balenciaga operating profit down 85%, Valentino now 30% owned by Kering with the option to take the rest. 3 brands, 1 conglomerate, same play on different logos. If you love any Kering brand and you're buying new at full price, you're not funding the craftsmanship. You're funding the experiment, and Kering isn't even the worst one on this list. 2 Gucci. In Interbrand's 2025 rankings, Gucci lost more brand value than any other luxury label, the biggest single destruction of brand value in the sector that year. Gucci sales fell 21% in 2024, then another 24% in the first quarter of 2025. 2025. Wholesale collapsed 42%. Kering's share price fell approximately 60% over 2 years. 3 creative directors in 3 years reads like a distress signal in designer clothes. The carousel. Alessandro Michele departed November 2022. Sabato De Sarno replaced him, hired to create a more timeless Gucci, and was fired in February 2025 after producing a 26% revenue drop. Demna Gvasalia, fresh off the Balenciaga child ed scandal, was named artistic director in March 2025. 3 directors, 3 visions, a revenue collapse. In November 2023, approximately 50 Gucci design employees in Rome staged the first industrial strike in the brand's 102-year history, protesting a forced relocation of over 150 employees to Milan. Trade union rep Federica Ricci told The Guardian, "For us, this is a collective dismissal. Workers held signs reading Gucci cuts but doesn't sew. The first labor action in a century inside a brand whose entire premium depends on Italian romance." Fashion editor Lindsay Solomon on the record. "I think of what a fashion editor is wearing. It's not Gucci, not a financial verdict. A cultural one. Kering is projecting up to 80 store closures by the end of 2025. Gucci is 45% of Kering's total revenues. What happens to Gucci happens to Kering. Gucci still operates some of the finest leather workshops in the world. The heritage isn't the problem. The problem is a company that paid executives to hire 3 designers in 3 years, raise prices through all of it, and still charge you the Gucci premium while the building was on fire. Love Gucci? Buy resale. Paying full price funds the 3 director circus, not the craftsmanship. The most famous fashion brand in the world just set a record for brand value destruction. Number 1 is a different conglomerate, same playbook. 1. Louis Vuitton. Louis Vuitton is the most valuable fashion brand in the world. In April 2025, for the first time in history, LVMH lost its market capitalization crown to Hermès, the brand that never chased volume and never saturated outlets. LVMH's own chief executive said on his own earnings call that certain houses had raised prices in a somewhat extravagant manner without really giving any justification. One of those brands is right here, the Reuters investigation, April 2025. Louis Vuitton operates 3 American manufacturing facilities, 2 in California, 1 in Alvarado, Texas, opened with fanfare in 2019. The Texas plant, employing roughly 300 workers, ranks among the worst-performing Louis Vuitton facilities globally. A former worker told Reuters she cut corners, using a hot pin to melt canvas and leather to conceal imperfections. The Made in USA label stamped into the Neverfull tote is stamped into a bag Reuters found was being melted at the corners to hide what the factory couldn't finish properly. Between 2011 and 2024, iconic Louis Vuitton bag prices rose approximately 76%. The Neverfull, $700 in 2007, reached $2,130 by 2025. Louis Vuitton raised American handbag prices twice in 2025, even as LVMH's fashion division revenue fell 8%. Raising prices while volumes fall isn't growth, it's extraction. The monogram canvas, made from PVC-coated cotton, not leather, never leather. Authentication experts identify the base material as PVC, the same class of plastic used in vinyl flooring. One reviewer described a 3-year-old Louis Vuitton bag looking like a 20-year-old vintage bag, while pieces from the 1980s remain structurally intact. The monogram hasn't changed. What carries it has. The top-of-line Louis Vuitton leather is a separate story. The hard-sided travel cases, the bespoke trunks, still legitimately extraordinary. The mass-market monogram canvas is a different product at luxury prices. New monogram canvas at full price is vinyl flooring material at heritage prices. If you love the monogram, buy vintage or buy leather. Skip the Texas-era tote. The richest man in Europe confessed on his own earnings call, a prosecution exhibit, entered by the defendant himself. The crown moved to Hermès. The aspirational middle market that built Louis Vuitton has been priced out and moved on, and the chief executive knows it. He told everyone, the luxury empire isn't collapsing by accident. It's collapsing because the people who run it, LVMH, Kering, Capri, Tapestry, and a handful of privately held families, spent 5 years deciding you wouldn't notice. You noticed. The numbers you just heard are what noticing looks like. The market is answering. The Federal Trade Commission blocked the Tapestry and Capri merger specifically because it would have raised prices on the brands American women most commonly buy. The government literally stepped in to stop a price hike. Consumers are routing spending to resale and to brands like Hermès that treated customers like customers instead of ATMs. Next time, we're opening the books on the smaller brands, quietly taking every dollar these houses left on the table. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. Drop a comment telling us which name surprised you most. Because once you know the price tag isn't the craftsmanship, you don't unsee it. And the next time a store clerk hands you a bag across a counter and smiles, you'll know exactly what you're looking at.